Well, good morning and welcome to the Advocacy Cycle. I would say monthly, we do these about 8 or 9 times a year, webinar for Chamber of Commerce professionals on how you can build a better advocacy cycle. I'm Brian Francis. I'm president of Lumen Strategies. And for those both joining us today live and those watching a recording later, we appreciate you coming along. As I mentioned, we do these about 8 or 9 times a year, and all of our webinars are recorded and on our website. So if you find this one valuable, we hope you'll go ahead and take a look at some of the others as you work to make your chamber truly the voice for business in your community. So Lumen Strategies empowers chambers of commerce to be the voice for business in their community through our advocacy consulting services and our online experience, the Advocacy Framework. I'm joined today by Sarah Principe and Brittany Burton, both members of the Lumen team who help in our advocacy efforts in a variety of ways through monitoring legislatures in North and South Carolina, consulting with our clients, and making sure that those in our Advocacy Framework online program have a quality experience. Today, we're talking about the advocacy cycle. And so one of the things that's great about advocacy programs for chambers of commerce is really you can start them at any time of year. A lot of people, I think in that kind of year cycle and, oh, we need to start programs on January 1st or we need to start at a specific time due to when our legislature convenes. But the great things about advocacy, it really is a kind of perpetual cycle of activities. And so you can really dive in at any time. And so we're going to kind of hit 4 big buckets of advocacy: the identify and list piece of the process, communicate and advocate, monitor and report, and review and refine. The other thing that we always talk about with advocacy should be a money maker for your chamber. And we'll talk a little more about ways that you can leverage your advocacy efforts to bring funding into your chamber. But ultimately, this is a program that should be both mission focused and revenue positive. And we always say that's kind of the golden quadrant, that we know there are some things your chamber is going to do that are mission focused, but they cost you money, but they're important, and so you do them. And we know there's some things you're going to do to raise funds to support those mission focused things, but aren't really focused on the mission themselves. Those are both important, but doing those things that are both mission focused and revenue positive are really the sweet spot you want to be in. So we're going to take this kind of step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, but as I mentioned, you can really enter this process at any time. The first thing that we're going to talk about, though, is identifying and listing the issues and legislative agenda items that you want to work on. And so some kind of quick tips on how you can do this. One of the things you can do is look at other chambers, look at similar sized chambers in your state, look at those that are in your region, look at what your state chamber is working on. I would caution you, though, this is not a cut and paste exercise. This is not something where you just want to do that old chamber R&D and literally rip off and duplicate somebody else's legislative agenda. First of all, there are probably issues that are unique to your members. Maybe it's something that's a local issue that other places in your state aren't experiencing, or maybe your membership mix is, more manufacturing or more commercial retail. And based on those kind of idiosyncrasies, you're going to want to make sure you customize your agenda. You also want to make sure that you're getting your members buy-in. And so one of the things we always counsel is when you're starting to identify the issues that you want to address, put a survey out to your members. Use that Survey Monkey or a Google Form sheet. There are a lot of free tools that you can use. Couple of nuances on this. First of all, if you're a chamber professional that's ever done a survey, response rates are just awful. That's just the reality of it. But those responses that you do get are gold for you. They really let you know what your chamber members are thinking and where their concerns lie. The other thing is it gives you the ability when, and this will happen and it's okay, a chamber member says, why did you take this position on this issue? You can say, well, we surveyed our members. And when they say, well, you never asked me my opinion, you can say, in fact, we did. We sent you the survey to see where you would be on this. So it's a little bit of just a backstop as you put together and move forward your legislative agenda. There are some tricks you can use to get better results from those surveys. One that we love is if you have a business after hours or a luncheon or some event where you've got a lot of members, Have QR codes set up on the tables or around the event for people to scan the QR code and take the survey right there. And particularly if it is the sort of thing where you have a program, like you're doing a luncheon and there is a speaker at the podium, one of the things you can do is literally pause the program for 2 minutes and say, right now we want everybody to take out their phone, scan the QR code, and take our survey because we really need your input. One of the other things you can do is work with your local government. So oftentimes, particularly when you're advocating at the state or federal level, there are issues where you and your local government are going to work together, where maybe there is an effort that they have to get road funding on an important corridor in your community, another grant from the federal government that will improve business. Maybe there, is some state or federal regulation that is impeding their permitting process and they want to get that resolved so that they can permit businesses faster. You want to work with them. So knowing where their legislative priorities are at the state and federal level are a great way to get ideas for your legislative agenda. And the second thing we would suggest you do is create a public policy task force. If you've been following us for a while, you know we've always had a little bit of ambiguity as to what we call this group. Sometimes we call it an advocacy council. Sometimes we call it a public policy committee. I think I've really landed at task force because we really want your members to see this as an action-oriented group and one that doesn't meet necessarily on a set schedule just because they have to. We want them to come together when there's work to do. We want them to feel like it's okay to not meet if there is not work to do. And by doing that, you really value your members' time and you get the most out of them. And it doesn't become an obligation. It becomes an opportunity for those that you've invited to your task force to really shape the policy of the chamber. Who do you put on that task force? Well, government and community affairs professionals are a great place to look. If you are in a community with some bigger companies, they will typically have those. But just about every community that I've seen will have a utility provider, like the local energy company, will have a community affairs professional whose whole job is to make connections with the business community throughout their territory. Those are great people to pull in because they are going to have the resources of being at a bigger company to talk about policy issues. Broadband providers, another great place to look. Hospitals, another great place to look. So bring in those folks who may have that broader policy understanding or role within their company. Get small business owners. They're going to know day to day what is happening at the various levels of government that are either making it easier or making it more difficult for them to succeed. And you want that voice. Top local executives, that plant manager at a manufacturing facility, the general manager of the company, the CEO, or if it's a broader company that has locations in other places. And then another one, and we oftentimes talk about the Public Policy Committee as a great grooming ground. It's a great place to identify future board members. It's a great place to try out someone you think may be the future chair of your chamber. Let them chair the Public Policy Task Force. And along with that, we think if your chamber is running a leadership program, this is a great place to kind of plug in those folks that you've identified in your leadership program as potential leaders for the chamber to keep them involved. I know that's often a struggle for folks who run leadership programs and those who participate in them to say, what's next? Where's my next step? And this is a great next step. So hopefully that gives you some kind of tips for creating that initial list of what your guiding principles and what your legislative agenda items are. Figure out what it is that the government is doing that hurts business or what they could do to help business. And don't feel like you need to get 3 and 4 pages of those. I mentioned looking at other chambers for ideas. Some chambers, you'll pull up their legislative agenda and it is a book. You don't need a book, especially when you're just getting started. Pull 3 or 4 things that would really make a difference for your members and tackle those. And so once you have those items, what are you doing? Well, you're going to communicate and advocate for those. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. And when you're doing this, the reason communicate and advocate sounds a little redundant. Here's the distinction I draw. Advocating is speaking to those in positions to make decisions, those elected officials, those folks within the administration or your city or county manager, and you're telling them you want them to do something because it'll make business better. Communicating is more about conveying to your members and your potential members the work that you are doing. One of the things that we always talk about in public policy is cause and effect is really hard to demonstrate. We advocated for this law and then this law or this bill, and then this bill became law. And it's kind of hard for people to say, well, did your advocacy really make a difference? One of the ways, though, it becomes self-evident to your members and to your potential members that your advocacy made a difference is if you've been talking about it all along the process. If something becomes law and all of a sudden you try to take credit for it and nobody has ever heard you talk about it before, there's a little bit of a difficulty with credibility there. But if you're telling people about what you're working on over and over and over again, and then that becomes law, it's real easy for them to see the connection in their mind. And so some of the ways that you can do that, you can have a legislative breakfast. This is a great opportunity to bring a big group of your members together along with some of your legislators. You're kind of doing both communication and advocacy in that breakfast. You are both telling the members, the legislative members, elected officials, what you want them to do. And you're communicating to your chamber members what you are working on. So you kind of get the two bites of the apple with that event. The other thing I love about legislative breakfast as a starting point when you're getting going, most chamber professionals know how to run events. It's kind of in your DNA. It's something you've got a lot of experience on. And so this is just another event in many ways. It's just putting together a little bit of a legislative program where you're talking about your legislative agenda. The program aspect might be a little bit different, but the logistics are by and large the same as what you're always doing. Other areas, writing op-eds, if you are fortunate enough to still have a local newspaper, writing blogs that you're posting on your website and sharing via social media. One of the things that we talk about in the advocacy element and communication element, you want to tell the world your legislative priorities, both because you want that helps build support, and it also, as we mentioned, shows folks what you're working on. We'll mention in a second kind of the things that you don't want to necessarily tell the world. Other opportunities, small group meetings, inviting your legislator to come to the office along with your board chair and your policy committee chair to talk through issues, or even better, a state capitol trip. Legislators love people coming to see them in the Capitol. And it's interesting the difference in meetings when you meet with somebody in the district versus when you meet them in the Capitol. There's just a different feel to it, and it can be a really effective way to stay on the radar of your elected officials. We do have another webinar that talks about how to plan a state capitol trip. So go to our webinar page and check that out if that's something that you think you might want to do. All right, monitor and report. And so again, this is step 3, but this could be step 1. If you are in a state where your legislature is still meeting and you don't have a legislative agenda, you can still monitor what's going on that's of general interest to your members, interest to the business community, and you can tell them about it. You can tell your board members, and that adds value. You can do video updates for all of your members. And you may say, but that does require me to pay attention to what goes on at the legislature, and that can be a little bit daunting. We do have another webinar where we talk about how you can monitor bills as they're progressing. There are some great AI tools that you can use out there to help summarize some of that legislation. You can also lean on your state chamber or other interest groups, regional chambers in your area to see what they're talking about. Most state chambers are putting out weekly bulletins that talk about what has happened in the legislature. Use that, repackage it, make it relevant to your community, and use that the basis for either your email updates or your video updates. And the other thing you can do is do action alerts. So if there is legislation that your members are concerned about and when it's going to be heard, you can send out to them, hey, now is the time to contact your legislator. Here's their contact information. One of the things that we encourage folks to do if you are doing action alerts, do not give people an email to cut and paste. Legislators flat out don't read them. Once they see that they have gotten the form letter, most of them are in fact even setting or having their assistant set up, or if they're technologically savvy, setting up rules that are dumping them in a folder or dumping them in the trash. And they are not even looking to see how many of those they're getting, because they know there was a very low threshold for anybody to contact them about that stuff. And it's not, for lack of a better word, kind of a heartfelt message. When you do action alerts, encourage people to tell their personal story, tell how the legislation that they are contacting the legislator about will personally impact their business. And that will be way more effective. And some people say, yeah, but that's also harder. And so I won't get as many messages. I think most legislators would tell you 10 customized messages have way more impact than 100 cut and paste form letters. And so it's okay if you're not generating the volume because the quality is that much better. I'm next going to give you a little example of what you can do with a video update. Technology is great these days. You can film this on your phone, edit using some either really inexpensive or free video editing software, and provide folks an update each week. So here's one that we produce for one of our clients, Union County in North Carolina.
Legislation aimed at improving workforce readiness and funding for community colleges is making progress in North Carolina. Hey, I'm Sarah Principe, and we're championing business growth and prosperity through advocacy. It's June 4th, 2024. Last week, the General Assembly was limited in its legislative action as the House paused its meetings to mourn the passing of Rick Moore, the father of House Speaker Tim Moore. In light of this somber event, it was fitting for the House to cancel its business for the week, allowing members and staff to honor his memory. Even though most committee meetings were canceled, I would like to draw your attention to the House Standing Committee on Community Colleges, which unanimously gave a favorable report to House Bill 1069, a bill aimed at changing how the state funds community colleges. House Bill 1069 is part of Propel NC, the community college system's initiative to align course funding with industry and workforce needs. The bill proposes changing the current funding model, which uses 4 tiers based on program characteristics, such as cost and community skills gaps. Colleges then receive funding based on the number of full-time equivalent students enrolled in each of their programs. Instead, the new model will shift funding based on workforce sector and labor market outcomes, like salary levels and job demand. This would ensure that curriculum and continuing education courses within the same workforce sector receive the same funding levels. This alignment can help create a more competent and job-ready workforce, reducing the gap between education and employment requirements. This targeted approach helps ensure that critical industries receive a steady stream of well-trained graduates, thereby supporting business growth and sustainability in areas like healthcare, technology, and trades. This legislation does come with a significant price tag, with an allocation of $99 million for the fiscal year 24-25 and $93 million in recurring funds. Passing significant legislation during the short session can be a heavy lift, but its unanimous approval in committee is certainly a step in the right direction. The bill now heads to the House Committee on Appropriations. As always, we'll continue monitoring legislation that could impact our community and your business. Until next time, I'm Sarah Principe on behalf of your Union County Chamber.
Now, I will note before we get into review and refined, I think the only thing worse than having to watch yourself on video is knowing that other people are watching you while you watch yourself on video, which is why I put Sarah's video on there and not one that I had done, but she did a great job. And I wanted to just point out a couple of things that we accomplished in that video. First of all, you'll notice we subtitled it. What we have found from our members, some, quite frankly, like to read what is going on while watching that video because they're in a meeting that they don't want to pay attention to. And so some of your chamber members will get their update by reading the subtitles, watching the video when they maybe should be paying attention to something else. Others will want to watch that video while they're working on their email and they just listen to what she is saying. And so that's part of the reason why we do those videos rather than just give an email for folks to read. It gives people an opportunity to kind of digest the content in whatever way they prefer. A couple of other things you'll note about that video. We got pretty nuanced on a workforce development issue, a priority for the chamber, priority for their members, but one that's not necessarily going to get a lot of attention from the popular press, be it TV or websites or newspapers. And so that is really creates an opportunity for your chamber to fill a gap and give your members information about what's happening in public policy that really impacts business that they're not going to hear anywhere else. The other thing that we try to do is, in a very kind of more basic level, educate people on the process. So, hey, this is our short session. And in the past, we've talked to them about what that means. But this means it's going to be hard to get this thing done this year. But, there is progress being made. And so it's a good opportunity when you see your legislators to, reference this and tell them that it's something that we're paying attention to. So really encourage you to kind of fill that information gap for your members and do that monitoring and reporting and keep them informed about the things that impact their business, because they may make business decisions based on what public policy is occurring, or they may be able to advocate for something different if it's really going to hurt their business. And then finally, review and refine. So at the end of your legislative session, as you kind of typically get into the fall, you're going to want to maybe do a summit where you bring your members back and say, hey, earlier this year, we did a legislative breakfast where we talked to you about our priorities. We want to tell you what happened with those. The other thing with the summit, you can start kind of priming the pump for your next set of issues. So when we talked to you earlier this year, we had not identified affordable housing as a big issue in our community. But over the course of this year, we have recognized that there's public policy needs to promote workforce housing in our community. And so now we're going to talk a little bit about that so that you members can start thinking about what we should support in the future to encourage this. So good opportunities with that. Obviously, you want to do kind of your final reports, your legislative check card. Tell everybody what you achieved, and then tell folks what is still on the docket. And that is going to feed back into that original step one when your policy task force comes back together to form your next legislative agenda. There will be items that you can take off because you achieved them, items that may need to continue, maybe items that you just decide we're never going to achieve this and it's time for us to move on and focus on other things. This is also a great time to do candidate forums, and we really encourage chambers to get involved. And this is another one where it can happen a couple times a year, because we really think you need to be doing candidate forums both for your primary elections and for your general elections. Probably even more important for your primaries. In many, many communities in this country, the primary determines who the elected official will be because the districts are so lopsided, and people don't vote in primaries at the same rate they do in general elections. And so particularly, we need business folks paying attention to what's happening in those primaries, getting involved, voting, and candidate forums are great ways to really force the candidates to talk about business issues that they might not be talking about in other areas, and give your members an opportunity to hear directly from them. So let's talk about the benefits to your chamber of doing all of these things, because, I really believe there's kind of this is a two outcome approach, I guess. You are going to make the business climate in your community better when you are an advocate. You're also going to strengthen your chamber when you're an advocate. You're going to have better member retention. Now, when folks are being called for their renewals and they say, I never had time to come to any events, you can say, you don't need to come to any events. You are getting benefit from your chamber every Monday when the legislature is in session, and you're getting a report from us about what has happened that could impact your business. You have us as an advocate so that you don't have to pay attention and contact your legislators every single week about important issues, because we're in contact with them. You get real benefit from your chamber without ever coming because of our advocacy efforts. You get event revenue, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. You all know how to sell sponsorships to events. This gives you other events that you can sell sponsorships to. What I am going to talk a little bit about, though, is advocacy fund sponsorships. You might not even realize that you have members who just want you to make the business climate better in your community. And quite frankly, they're not, like a manufacturer is not selling necessarily to the local community. They don't necessarily need their name plastered everywhere, maybe, They might just want to fund you to do this work, and they're not looking for any sort of return or marketing out of it, but they want you to get things done and they want to help you get things done. And so you can approach them and ask them to just fund your advocacy efforts. If they do want to have their name on agendas, you can certainly do that. If they want to have, let's say we just did an event with a member of Congress for one of our chambers. Let's say you had a few key sponsors who wanted 5 minutes to talk to that member of Congress before the event started. That could be a benefit of your advocacy fund. So find out what it is they want to achieve, but no, it's not necessarily that same sort of advertising or sponsorship package that you're used to selling, but there is a great opportunity. And then there is the advertising opportunity as well. So we talked about doing these weekly updates. We have a car dealership in one of our member chambers that has sponsored our whole advocacy program, and they get their logo on that video that goes out to all the members each week. It's just another way for them to reinforce their brand, and it's another opportunity for you to generate revenue. So dollar signs are in advocacy. There's lots of ways to do it. We'd love to talk to you about how you can do that to fund both your advocacy program, but also have it be a net revenue positive part of your P&L. So to recap, and again, it's a cycle. You can kind of jump into the cycle at any point, but you want to identify and list your public policy priorities, communicate and advocate them, monitor and report, and then review and refine, because ultimately this is going to provide additional value to your members and it gives you an opportunity to generate revenue. And just really quickly to talk about our firm for a second, our advocacy framework really puts structure around all these things. And, to a certain extent, you got the skeleton today, and we can really come in and put the meat on the bone to really help you build out that advocacy framework. We could do that as your outsourced advocacy director. We have a number of chambers where we are facilitating their policy task force. We're scheduling and organizing their trips to the state capitol. We're producing those legislative video updates for them. Imagine having a person on your staff doing all those things, but outsourcing it almost as a fractional government affairs officer allows you to get expertise at a price that you just couldn't afford if you were going to hire somebody on your staff. We do the monitoring and reporting on your legislative priorities. If you are a chamber in North or South Carolina, we are currently monitoring both of those legislatures, producing those weekly video updates. If you are in neither of those states, we are really anxious to expand and looking for new states. So reach out to us if that's something that you might be interested in, because we're looking for that next opportunity with our legislative video updates. Group coaching, we have twice a month group coaching opportunities for those who are putting together our framework who need a little bit of additional help. And so that's a great opportunity for us to help keep you accountable in moving your program forward and to answer those questions that you're seeing. And then that all builds from our Advocacy Framework online program. We have 25 pre-recorded videos. They're short, bite-sized pieces, 3 to 5 minutes, along with downloads that give you draft agendas, membership roster templates, whole talking points, all the stuff that you would need to implement the advocacy framework on your own. We can teach you how to do that. Many people pair that with our group coaching program, but you could do it as a standalone as well. But we think it's a great way if you need a little bit of structure and kind of want to go out on your own, but with a little guidance. That would be our Advocacy Framework online program. So with that, if there are any questions, feel free to unmute. I'd be happy to answer them right now. Otherwise, here's all my contact information, including I see a really poorly spaced email address that I will have to fix on a future slide. But you can also scan that QR code and my little Blink card will download right into your phone if you want to have my contact information that way. So with that, feel free to unmute or put in chat if you have any questions. You will also see in the chat opportunities to see some of our previous webinars, as well as an opportunity to schedule time with me. It says 30 minutes. If you want to just schedule 5, I'd be happy to talk to you. So with that, are there any questions?
No questions, just great information. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Michael. And appreciate you joining us today. And I appreciate those joining us on the recording and hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you.
Yeah. Have a great day.
You too.